Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Judge plays Truth or Lie with Black Boy, without knowing he has genius IQ. The Jefferson County Courthouse, usually filled with mundane civil cases and traffic offenses, was bathed in an eerie, almost oppressive silence this morning. Even the footsteps echoing on the antique wooden floor seemed to hesitate, as if aware of the unusual nature of what was about to unfold. It was a far cry from the stormy hearings where lawyers clashed in words and gestures. That day, the accused had neither a tie, nor a defense attorney, nor an official voice to represent him. He had only his silence, his calm, and his intelligence. The small courtroom, its walls yellowed by time, was half empty, but everyone present seemed suspended in the moment. On the dais sat Judge Thomas Monroe. A man in his 50s, with a square jaw and piercing eyes, he embodied pure authority. A former military prosecutor, his face bore the marks of years of rigor and decisive decisions. Not a man known for his compassion. Rumor had it that he could send a man to jail for bad behavior. He didn't like gossip, excuses, and children even less. But today, a child stood before him. A black boy, frail, as straight as a statue, his hands crossed in front of him, no trace of fear in his eyes. His gray hoodie was a little big, his sneakers worn, his jeans slightly creased. He seemed out of time. He wasn't moving, wasn't trying to soften things up. He was waiting. His name, Elijah Carter, 12 years old. He was alone. His mother, exhausted by nights working as a nursing assistant, had been unable to leave the hospital. No court-appointed lawyer had yet arrived. And yet, the hearing had been continued. The accusation? Shoplifting. A designer watch, stolen from a downtown boutique. The owner had identified a black boy in a hoodie on the surveillance cameras. That was enough. Judge Monroe scanned the file quickly. Nothing remarkable. Thin case, vague charges, no prior record. But in his mind, a robbery was still a robbery. He looked up at Elijah, and with that cold half-smile that often preceded his cutting remarks, said, "So, Elijah. You know the game, truth or lie, right?" An amused murmur was heard from a corner of the room. The boy simply nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. It's a game where adults ask questions to find out if someone is lying. But sometimes they ask the wrong question." The silence that followed was dense. Even Monroe blinked slightly, surprised by the boy's confident tone. He continued, harder, as if to regain control. "Very well. Today we're going to play it. You're going to convince me that you didn't steal that watch. Be honest." Elijah barely lifted his chin, his eyes fixed on the judge's. No trembling, no tears. Only that strange, disarming peace. "I didn't steal that watch." Monroe raised an eyebrow. Amused, but intrigued. The child spoke with an almost mechanical precision, devoid of fear. The audience held their breath. Some waited for the boy to collapse. Others, silent, sensed that this trial was not going to follow the usual course. The clerk stopped typing. The prosecutor, absent-mindedly flipping through her file, slowly looked up. The security guard by the door crossed his arms doubtfully. Something about this boy was wrong, or shining. We didn't know yet. Judge Monroe leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the worn, solid oak table. His gaze pierced the silence like a scalpel, searching for the flaw behind Elijah's unnerving calm. "Explain to me," he said slowly, "how you can be so sure of yourself." He paused, his voice deeper, harder. "We have witnesses. We have footage. And the store claims to have seen you near the counter at the exact moment of the robbery." He expected to see the boy lower his eyes, stammer out a clumsy defense, like so many others. But Elijah stood straight, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the judge's. Then, with disarming clarity, he replied, "I know this store very well, Your Honor. I walk past it almost every day on my way home from school. On March 14, between 2 o'clock and 3 p.m., I was outside, a few blocks away. I was helping an elderly man carry his shopping bags home. He's my third-floor neighbor, Mr. Harold Gibbons. He's 76 years old, and he's had difficulty walking since his stroke. A murmur ran through the benches. The clerk stopped typing for a moment. Even the prosecutor, who had been indifferent until then, raised her head. "There's a surveillance camera at the corner of 8th Avenue and Spring Street," Elijah added. "It looks directly onto the sidewalk. I was able to view the footage thanks to Mr. Gibbons, whose son works at the security company. I can see me helping him at exactly 2:07 p.m. We passed the Domino's coffee shop, then turn right. I walked him to his door. He can testify." A silence fell, heavier, almost electric. Elijah continued, as if he were unfolding a mathematical demonstration. "Then I studied the store videos. The ones the police showed me. I know they're blurry, but there are some clear elements. The boy in the video is wearing Nike Air Max 2022s. I'm wearing black Converse Chuck Taylors, 2019 model, white soles. The wear on my soles is on the left side only. So the mark on the ground is different." Judge Monroe frowned. A shiver of discomfort ran down his spine. He hadn't expected this. This precision. This assurance. "Wait. You're saying you examined the images yourself?" he repeated, this time without irony. Elijah nodded. "Yes, sir. I took the original files the police presented to me and analyzed them using an old free software program I use at the public library. The metadata in the files shows a 22-second time lag between the internal cameras and the entrance camera. That's enough to distort the timeline if you don't notice." The entire room hung on his every word. A strange atmosphere was setting in, a mixture of embarrassment, admiration, and disbelief. Judge Monroe folded his hands, suddenly less confident. Something was slowly crumbling in his posture. He looked at Elijah the way you might look at a file you've misread, too quickly, too sure of yourself. He said slowly, almost in a low voice. "How do you know all this, Elijah?" The boy seemed to hesitate. He lowered his eyes a little, not out of embarrassment, but as if he was weighing his words. "I'm in a program for gifted children at Columbia University. I'm majoring in advanced mathematics. I was admitted last year after achieving the highest scores on the district's logic test." The silence turned icy. The judge blinked. "Columbia? But I can't go often," Elijah continued quietly. "My mom works nights as a nurse's aide and days at a laundromat. We live in East Flatbush. Too far from campus. Sometimes I have to babysit my little sister, so I study alone. On weekends, I go to the public library, when it's open." No one moved anymore. Even the police officer in charge of monitoring the room, a stocky man with a hard look, looked down for a moment, confused. Judge Monroe, known for his inflexibility, felt an unusual tension rising in his chest. He knew what he had seen first, a black boy, alone, poor, wearing a hoodie. A stereotype. A silhouette. A prejudice. And yet, what he heard there, was a brilliant demonstration. Calm. Structured. Unassailable. A genius, without a defender. He bore the single-handed burden of proving his innocence in the face of a system all too eager to condemn him. Monroe remained silent. He slowly placed his glasses on the table. He had just realized that, for the first time in a long time, this was no ordinary trial. This was no game of truth or lie. It was a lesson. And it was he, the judge, who was being examined. Elijah was no ordinary boy. At just 12 years old, his results on the Stanford Binet test placed him among the most intelligent 0.1% of individuals of his generation, with an IQ estimated at 162, a score higher than that of Albert Einstein, although he himself never boasted about it. But his life, far from the laboratories and elite schools, took place in the gray and noisy streets of East Flatbush, in Brooklyn. He lived in a dilapidated three-story building, whose hallways smelled of damp and stale tobacco. The elevators often broke down, police sirens wailed at night, and the neighbors, though supportive, were tired. Tired of struggling, of working too much for too little. Elijah was the only son of Danielle Carter, a courageous and discreet woman, a night nurse's aide in a public hospital and a daytime employee in a laundromat. Since Elijah's father had left them, she had never stopped working. She sometimes came home with eyes red from exhaustion, her fingers numb, but always with a smile for her son. Elijah, on the other hand, had learned to take care of himself at a very young age. At 7, he already knew how to cook, watch his little sister when Danielle wasn't there, and fix the old electronics of his upstairs neighbor, a retired technician Dr. Patel, who had given him his first digital tablet, cracked, slow, but functional. On this tablet, Elijah downloaded PDFs of science books. He read Newton E. Hawking, studied differential equations, explored quantum mechanics with the same curiosity that a child reads a comic book. He loved diagrams, flowcharts, algorithms. But no one really noticed. At public school, his teachers found him strange, too quiet, too different. Some thought he cheated on his tests. Others ignored him, too busy to notice the quiet genius sitting at the back of the class. He wasn't unruly, he wasn't a problem. So he flew under the radar. Until the day an interdistrict academic competition revealed her gifts. The math teacher, Ms. Holbrook, was the first to be moved. She sent her application to Columbia, which immediately approved her admission to a program for gifted children. But distance, transportation, and financial constraints made participation irregular. Elijah had no driver, no scholarship, no logistical support. He went when he could. The rest of the time, he learned on his own. This apparent calm, this way of speaking slowly, of always choosing one's words, it was not shyness. It was a mental discipline forged by solitude, reading, and observing the world. Elijah had a deep understanding of where he lived, what it entailed, and what people saw first when they laid eyes on him, a black boy in a hoodie, in a poor neighborhood. He knew that society often left no room for error for those like him. This trial, he knew deep down, was not fair. Not because he had been wrongly accused, that happened every day. But because there wouldn't even have been a trial if his name had been Matthew McConnell, a banker's son and Park Slope resident. Blurry cameras wouldn't have been enough. We would have taken our time. We would have doubted the evidence. We would have waited for the lawyer. But there, we went for it. As if it were obvious. And yet, Elijah was not bitter. He was lucid. His genius wasn't just in numbers. It was in his understanding of people, systems, and the flaws of a world that always wanted to move faster when it came to judging the poor, the marginalized, the invisible. So, that day, in that icy courtroom, he wasn't looking for pity. He wasn't begging for clemency. He was looking for the truth. And he knew he would have to demonstrate it alone. As the prosecutor slowly rose from her bench, a shudder ran through the room. Her name was Rebecca Lonsdale, a woman known for her inflexibility and seriousness, always dressed to the nines, her impeccable gray suit contrasting with the sharp tone of her speeches. Rarely caught out, she spoke with calculated authority. But on this day, a visible doubt crossed her features, something almost inconceivable to those who knew her. She glanced furtively at Elijah, then at the judge, and announced in a clear but less assured voice than usual. Your Honor. The evidence is insufficient, and the defense, in this case, this young man, has demonstrated objective and rigorous facts. I therefore propose that the charges be dismissed immediately. There was a moment of absolute silence, as if the air itself had frozen. A barely audible sigh escaped the throat of an old man sitting in the back. The usually imperturbable clerk paused in her typing. Even the policeman stationed in the corner of the room seemed to hold his breath. Judge Monroe stood there for a moment, as if still trying to comprehend what had just happened. A few minutes earlier, he had been ready to dispose of a minor case with a few swings of the gavel. And now he was faced with an uncomfortable truth, that of a system too quick to judge. He looked down at the boy, then back up at the room. "Court apologizes to Elijah Carter," he declared, his voice slightly hoarse. "There is no substantive evidence against him. This case is closed. Elijah, you are free to go." No one moved at once. Even Elijah didn't seem to immediately understand what this meant. He blinked. Then, slowly, he bowed his head in thanks. He didn't jump for joy. He didn't cry. He stood straight. Dignified. As if he knew this victory didn't erase the fact that it should never have been necessary. But outside, the world had already begun to change. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. It was not the justice served that captured the attention, but the fact that she almost condemned a child prodigy because of his appearance and background. An article from the Jefferson Times subtitles: "The child who pleaded his case like a master of the bar." Then came a report on a regional channel, followed by a segment on a major national network. Social media went wild. The face of Elijah, this boy with the calm voice and sharp wit, went viral. Clips of his impromptu plea were shared. Memes, videos, and viral op-eds began to blossom. A legend was born. Great intellectual figures spoke. Small Blue Diamond, a Columbia professor, said live on air, "We failed. This boy should have been sitting in an amphitheater, not in the dock." Small Blue Diamond, a civil rights activist, tweeted, "Elijah Carter is living proof that this system is flawed. It's not a miracle that he was acquitted. It's a scandal that he was indicted." Organizations such as the NAACP and Black Youth Genius Network immediately contacted the Carter family. Lawyers, patrons, educational foundations offered their help, support, and even scholarships for Elijah and his sister. His hometown, long neglected by institutions, became the scene of a new excitement. Meanwhile, the judge Thomas Monroe was experiencing a more discreet, but profound upheaval. He wasn't one for public confessions. He didn't like to admit his mistakes. But something inside him had been cracked that day. Invited to conferences on judicial reform, he found himself face to face with lawyers, teachers, and activists. At first, he was uncomfortable. He spoke little. He listened a lot. He reread his old files, his own decisions. And for the first time, he sincerely asked himself, how many innocent people had been condemned simply because they lacked Elijah's genius to defend themselves? In a debate at Fordham University, he soberly stated, "The greatest danger in a courtroom isn't lying, it's lazy looking. When you can't see beyond a hoodie or an address in the northern suburbs." Elijah, for his part, refused several media offers that wanted to highlight him as an intellectual curiosity. He once told a journalist, "I'm not an exception. I'm proof that many are forgotten. Others like me just haven't had the chance to be heard." He returned to school, now with a full scholarship. He continued to read, learn, and teach. At 13, he started a logic and debate club for children in his neighborhood, in a room loaned by the public library. Justice had wanted to crush him. He had responded with the only weapon that no one could take from him, son intelligence. And he wasn't just acquitted. He had awakened a nation. After the Elijah Carter case, something had broken in Judge Thomas Monroe's rigid routine. Back in his office cluttered with files, among the piles of dusty case law and the photos of his old university friends, he felt for the first time in a long time a dull worry insinuate itself into him. He found himself thinking about that boy. His calm. His clarity. This child had not only proven his innocence, he had exposed the flaws in a system he had served for decades. Monroe realized he could no longer ignore this reality. He then made a radical decision. For a man of his age and rank, he began to open his mind. He invited specialists. First, child psychologists, capable of explaining the mechanisms of cognitive development, the disorders sometimes misinterpreted as disobedience, and above all the need for a humane approach towards minors. Then, experts in intelligence, particularly in high potential, came to present the invisible difficulties encountered by these exceptional children in an often unsuitable school and judicial system. Finally, Monroe invited representatives of community organizations and minority leaders, voices that had long been foreign to him, but whose testimonies and struggles moved him deeply. The debates were sometimes lively, sometimes disturbing, often enlightening. He discovered, sometimes with shame, that his worldview had been narrow. That hasty judgments, implicit prejudices, and a certain institutional rigidity had often betrayed the justice he nevertheless wanted to serve. Little by little, Judge Monroe became an agent of change. He participated in training courses for magistrates on racial and social bias. He campaigned for the creation of mediation and psychological support units in juvenile courts. In his audiences, he now took the time to listen, to ask more human questions, to check the evidence meticulously. His tone, once dry and sharp, gained nuance and empathy. Judge Monroe had not become perfect. He was still a man. But he had become a conscious judge. For his part, Elijah continues his ascent. Supported by his mother, his community, and the new opportunities offered by scholarships and adapted programs, he invested himself in his studies with renewed determination. In his neighborhood, he became a role model. Not out of arrogance, but by example. He founded a science and debate club for young people, a space where everyone could express their ideas, learn, and dream. His deepest dream, nourished by this experience of injustice and struggle, was clear. Become a lawyer. A lawyer capable of defending those who, like him, had been marginalized, wrongly accused, forgotten by the system. A few years later, at a ceremony in the Great Hall of Jefferson's Courthouse, Judge Monroe invited Elijah, now a young man, to speak. Before an assembly of judges, lawyers, students, and members of the community, Elijah spoke these words. Justice should never be a game of truth or lies. It must be a commitment to dignity, fairness, and the recognition of everyone, regardless of their background or appearance. I am proof that behind every accusation, there is a story to be heard. Thank you, Judge Monroe, for learning this lesson with me. The old judge, his eyes misty, knew his role had changed that day. A few years later, Elijah did indeed become a lawyer, specializing in civil rights. He argued cases that changed legislation and opened the courts to more inclusive justice. As for Monroe, he continued his fight in the shadows, working to train the new generation of judges to never forget that behind every case, there is a human being.